everybody. It's good to see so many people here. Michael Albert will speak for about an hour, and then we will have the rest discussion and questions and answers. That will go on for as long as you want, and Michael wants.
You don't want to say that.
So we'll have a break in between. So in about an hour, we'll have a break. Yeah, one of the things you often hear if you're an activist on the left and you're talking with people is that it's very good that you're criticizing and protesting and pointing at all the problems, but what do you propose? And very often we come up with kind of vague answers like, well, we want justice or even freedom or equality, and then it stops there. And I don't think that's enough. I think it's a good idea to know if we're serious about changing the world, to have an idea of where we're going, and to have visions for what kind of society we would like to end up with. And somebody who has visions and know what he wants is Michael Albert. So
some people call it hallucinations.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay, so I'm for freedom, justice, and equality. We're finished. Sorry. Let me just take a minute for a brief sociological survey. How many people are under 20 years of age? Congratulations. But we need more of you. How many are 20 to 30? No, that's very good. 30 to 40? Over 40. All right, this is actually a very good breakdown, which is not common, actually. So it's very pleasant to see that. I want to do one more little poll, if you'll humor me on this. How many of you have heard of IOPS, International Organization for Participatory Society? Quite a few. How many have heard of participatory economics? Whoa. Okay. But many of you haven't. So some of you might have to bear with some of this as being redundant of what you already know. But hopefully I'll give it a little twist every now and then. The title I received was "What is IOPS?" and why bother? But the introduction was about vision, which leaves me a little bit confused because I often speak about vision. I speak about participatory economics and participatory society. So I'm going to focus around IOPS, but I'll try and include some of the other. And when we get to the discussion, of course, you can ask anything you want, but in particular, if you want to ask questions about, well, what is a participatory society, what is participatory economics, fine. Or if you have criticisms of it, by all means, bring it up. Okay, so on the assumption that we see something wrong with the society outside, in other words, that we're not delusional or criminal, and we can see that tens of millions of people a year dying of starvation and preventable disease. Can everybody hear in the back? Yeah? Dying of starvation and preventable disease is horrible. That billions of people working at jobs where they have no say over what they're doing and where their dignity is sort of diminished day by day is horrible. That the hypocrisy and the racism and sexism are horrible. And horrible is really a very calm and modest word to use for the hellhole out there. That drones are mind-boggling. That bombs falling on people's heads and ripping them to shreds is disgusting. For those of us who can see that, we would like something better if something better is possible. And that's they disappeared. That's the vision issue, but I'm going to presuppose it a little bit for the moment. So let's suppose that we not only reject the system around us, we reject, at least if we can do something about it, capitalism and sexism and racism and authoritarianism and war. but we have a notion of what we want, and we'll come to that in a minute. Why do we need a revolutionary organization? Why do we need something called the International Organization for Participatory Society? Well, the claim goes more or less like this. We need an organization because you can't individually usher in a new society. Nor can I, nor can anybody in the room. We can't do that as individuals. We can't create a new society, a person at a time. We have to find a way to coalesce our energies and our insights into a process that leads toward a new society. And an organization is a vehicle for doing that. It's not the only vehicle for doing that, but it's an important vehicle for doing that. And what does an organization need to achieve? Well, one thing it needs to do is to share analysis and vision, what it is we want, and strategy among a large number of people, assuming we want a change that isn't led by a few, ushering in a new society that's ruled by a few. We rather want a process that's participatory and that involves lots of people in a serious way, not just as followers. Then we need to have an organization to spread the understanding of the world and the understanding of vision and then the understanding of strategy that allows everybody to have an opinion, to participate, to influence analysis, vision, and strategy, to influence program rather than just carry out what somebody tells them they ought to be doing. So that's one reason we need it. Another reason we need it is because those things being shared can lead to shared program. That's the problem of the individual as compared to the group. Another reason we need it is because we need a process that allows us to serve ourselves in some sense, to develop our capacities, to develop our level of fulfillment so that we stay with the process, so that we feel about what's going on that it's worthy and desirable and rather than alienating and off-putting. We'll come to more on that shortly. We need it to develop programs that we can work on together, and we need it, an organization, I think, ironically, to avoid sectarianism. Sectarianism is a very powerful force in which people sort of lose the capacity to objectively and in light of evidence and sober discussion arrive at opinions about things, and instead they hold opinions about things sort of religiously, as if it's written in some doctrine someplace and it has to be defended to the death. And the discussions veer away from actual reality and simply toward the defense of positions, because those positions are deemed critical. And we need an organization to foster mutual aid. We'll see all these in a minute, but this still doesn't argue for IOPS. IOPS, after all, is a new organization, just a few months old. There's lots of organizations. So why don't we just go with one that already exists? Why don't we all join? Why aren't I sitting here telling you, I know about this organization or that organization. It would be a good idea for us all to consider joining it. Instead of sitting here and saying, I think it would be a good idea for you to take a look at IOPS and consider joining that. Assess it yourself and decide what you want to do, but I want to recommend it. Why? Well, the reason for that is because, sadly, I think, most organizations out there, and I would almost go so far as to say all, except that would be a little bit extremist. All. No. Don't do the things I just described well enough. They obscure analysis. Typically, organizations that are about changing society may or may not have an analysis, but when they present it in such obscure language and with so little relation to daily events in people's lives that it becomes almost impossible to understand. And so instead of it being something that is shared and that increases participation, it becomes something that elevates the very few who can speak the language and reduces everybody else to obedience or leaving, more often than not leaving. And that's obviously very harmful. So we have to get around that. Then consider that I said it had to share a vision. Think about most organizations. They either don't have a vision at all, That is, they cannot answer the question in any compelling, inspiring way, what do you want? That was what the introduction mentioned. They can say freedom, they can say justice. But if a person out there thinks there is no alternative, Thatcher's famous phrase, which almost everybody thinks, right? Then saying you're for freedom or justice doesn't cut it. It doesn't do much. And we of all people should understand this. Because when our politicians, suppose Bill Clinton gets up and gives a speech, or Obama, two of the prime examples, and says, I'm for freedom, I'm for people participating, I'm for justice, I'm for people caring about each other, and we don't believe them. Why don't we believe them? Because they advocate institutions which are contrary to what they're saying they're for, right? And so we can see through the rhetoric to the reality. Well, when we say we're for freedom and justice, they look at our infighting, and they look at our inability to answer questions, and they look at the way we treat each other, they being most of the population, right? It isn't just that they look at lies about us. They also look at truths about us, and they deduce that, no, we should not believe them. And there's much more that they look at that enables them to come to, or causes them to come to that conclusion, like our classism and our racism and our sexism. We'll come to that. Another thing is, as I said, the organizations have to fulfill their membership, cause their membership to become more committed. That's not what typical revolutionary organizations nowadays do. Instead, they burn out their membership, and they alienate their membership, and they cause people to leave. This is a very serious problem. In fact, arguably, this is the most serious problem of the left in some sense, if you think about it. Before the Iraq War, 12 million people demonstrate against the war. Year and a half later, the number of people demonstrating has gone down by a factor of 10. And then another 10. Now what should happen is that the number of people demonstrating should be growing. And yet the number of people demonstrating is declining. That's the paramount question for the left, not an analysis of how the IMF works to the 14th decimal place. An analysis of how the IMF works to the 14th decimal place gets you brownie points in the race to seem smart. But an analysis of why you go from 12 million down is about trying to win. And sadly, that's not what revolutionary organizations focus on. And nor do they present a good vision. The ones that present the vision present the old Soviet model or some other similar model, which is not worthy. And the ones that don't present a vision simply cannot deal with the question, what do you want? Cannot offset cynicism. So that's another reason why we need something new. Organizations are typically hotbeds of homogeneity and sectarianism, not diversity. And they should be. After all, we don't want a new society in which everybody is regimented. You know the old, I don't know about Denmark, but in the United States, the left is portrayed as wanting a regimented society in which everybody is alike. Right? And of course, we think it's a lie. But look at our behavior. I can go to a campus in the United States with a paint gun and shoot every radical on the campus on sight. Because they all look alike. They all dress alike. And if I get to hear them talk, I won't make any mistakes. Right? Now, there's something important there. Right? It's sort of, the myth about us is fed not just by lies, but literally by our behavior, which seems to, in fact, correspond pretty well to the myth about us. And these hurt us. So on such a campus, the left will organize and it will reach 100 or 200 or maybe 400 people, but then it stops growing. And why does it stop growing? Because it's comfortable. It's satisfied, it has a nice little community, which is a good thing, and people relate, and that's a good thing, but it's not really trying to win, it's not really trying to reach everybody on campus. It just reaches a point of stabilization and it sits there. And then the more serious people who really do want to get someplace tend to drift away. All right. These are some of the reasons why I think we need new organizations. So let's move on to the prospect of a particular new organization, the International Organization for Participatory Society. Where did it come from? Some years ago, everybody knows about the World Social Forum, these big gatherings. Yeah, do people know? Everybody knows. All right.
Yeah.
All right. So people know about the World Social Forum. So some years back, at a World Social Forum, some of us sort of sponsored, I suppose you could say, a forum within the forum that was called Life Beyond Capitalism. And then about a year later, there was another project called Reimagining Society. In the first project, maybe 30 people were participating in a deep way, and people were listening. Lots of people were listening. In the second project, maybe 100 people were producing content about what we want, about how to get it, and people were relating to it. And then we did a poll on ZNet. ZNet is a website. How many people are familiar with ZNet? All right, ZNet's a website online. It's in English, and it does what a Radical Red site does. It presents all sorts of information. It has various means of people interacting together, and it actually does present a lot of vision and strategy too. So we did a poll, and in this poll, we said basically, here are some features of a possible organization, and the features were what was to become the features of IAPS, of this actual new organization, but this was pre that. So here are some features. Would you, and now there was a multiple choice thing, read the features. Would you join right away if such a thing came into existence? Would you wait around a little and see if it got some traction and then join if it came into existence? Would you just not give a damn, thinking it was basically irrelevant, and ignore it? Would you not join it and really, feel negatively about it? And then the last one was, would you feel so negative about it that you would do your damnedest to make sure that nobody else joined it? Or maybe even to trash it. And we thought we would get a kind of a bell curve answer. There'd be some people in each thing, and more in the middle, sort of do nothing, and then less going toward the early end of the answers and less toward the late end of the answers. But that's not what happened. Instead, it was like this, except it really was like, here's question 1 and 2, and that's the 1 and 2 pings, and here's position 3, which is do nothing, and here's 4 and 5, not want to join at all or keep others out. So it was over 95%, we're going to either join immediately or join as soon as other people join. Well, we looked at that and we thought, maybe this can be done. Maybe now is the time when we can do this, when it's possible to form something that would be new and different. And so we confronted some problems with doing it. If you think about it, you can imagine how do you form a new organization that's going to be across borders, international, and yet bottom up. Now we come to the commitments. The commitments of this organization are self-management, to decision-making mechanisms that cause people to have a say in decisions in proportion to the degree they're affected. Right? That goes beyond democracy. Right? So it's you have a say in decisions in proportion to the degree you're affected. So you want local people to make the decisions that affect the local situation. And you want, even for the international or the national, people at every level are affected, so they have to have a say. So clearly the thing has to have a sort of a bottom-up dynamic regarding influence, regarding decision-making influence. But we also realized at the same time that it was hard to form an organization in Copenhagen, or to form an organization in Warsaw, or to form an organization in Cleveland, other cities. And it's hard because you feel isolated. And because no matter how good the ideas you might have are, and no matter how sincere you might be, there's a tendency to feel like, it's just hopeless. We're alone. We're blowing into the wind. And so there's a lack of momentum. And we felt like the momentum might come, at least in part, from knowing that people in many other places are doing it too. And from being able to learn from the lessons of what they're doing and have your experiences teach them. So how do you simultaneously form an organization that's international and yet is going to be bottom up in its decision making, is going to be self-managing. How can you possibly accomplish those two things at once? So we decided we would try. And here was the conception of how we would do it. We would put up a website, we did. We would take the commitments, the ideas that were in the poll, and we would make them the defining attributes of this new organization. So those were a function of that whole process I told you about, involving many people, plus 4,000 people advocating them. So that's pretty good. Not tons, but pretty good. So we took that as the basis. And then we said, we're not going to make any decisions unless we absolutely have to, until we have chapters and members that are broad enough and that are strong enough in terms of their internal development to be a real body. So imagine we had made decisions right away. Imagine we had said, well, we're going to form an international organization. It needs a program. What should the program be? What should our action program be? Well, in the first week, 2 people would have decided. You know, in 3 weeks later, 50 people would have decided. And a month later, 150 people would have decided. Whatever the trajectory is, it's still way too few to be deciding what an international organization's program would be. First of all, it's ridiculous, right? That few people can't implement any program. So it's sort of absurd. And the second reason it's wrong is because it's not self-management. It's a few people deciding for everybody. So we decided we wouldn't make decisions. We would hold off on everything that we could possibly hold off on until there were chapters, until it could be done bottom up. And we would be committed to that. And then we decided if we absolutely had to make a decision, we would do it only when it was just not controversial. So we put together a group of about, 50 or 60 people who would be on an advisory committee, and if an issue came up for a decision, they'd be polled, and unless they were basically unanimous, it wouldn't be done. But if they were unanimous, they were so represented and so respected that it would be seemingly okay. We've had very few decisions, so we haven't even had to use the structure. And then what happens, of course, is you need to recruit people. How do you recruit people when you don't have anything to recruit to? So you put up the commitments, and you put up the site, and you let people join. And that's what we did. And lo and behold, we now have about 3,000 members from about 100 countries. Not very long. And but it's still just members. So in other words, if you were a member, it would be because you filled out the form online and you became a member. Now, it should mean, and I think it does for most, that you read the commitments, you read the thing that you're supposed to agree to be a member, and you decided you liked it enough to join. But still, you're not doing anything necessarily. So the next task was, well, how can people form chapters from which they can then form program locally, and then they can federate nationally, and then you can have a real international organization. So the website allows you to find people who live near you, you contact people who live near you, you start to develop a chapter, you start to meet, and you start to do what? Well, some of the things that the commitments are about are visionary commitments, and we can talk about those more as we go along if you like. So for instance, let me mention one that's highly controversial. So not controversial is that this organization seeks a society which is not sexist, racist, or authoritarian, and is classless. So far, so good, right? This organization seeks to figure out what the institutions are that impose those ills and rejects those institutions. And this organization will propose alternatives which can accomplish what needs to be done without creating sexism, racism, authoritarianism, classism, and so on. But in one of the commitments are not too broad, they're not real detail, they're about key things. And one of the key things that is focused in on is somewhat controversial, I think. And that's not, say, property. So among everybody who's a serious leftist and anti-capitalist, rejecting private property goes without saying. And the committee and the organization IAPS does. It rejects private property. So if you're going to join, you have to agree with the commitment that says we reject private property, private ownership of the means of production. Okay, but then it also rejects something else. It rejects the old division of labor. And by that it means dividing up work so that 20% do all the empowering tasks and 80% do the rest, the disempowering tasks. Right? And that's what the corporate division of labor really does. Right? So if you look in American corporations, in Danish corporations, in old Soviet corporations, doesn't matter where you look, you find a division of labor in which roughly, it varies from industry to industry, but roughly 20% of the workforce is doing all the empowering work. They're doing a combination of tasks and responsibilities, different for different people, which are empowering. And the 80% are doing disempowering work. Okay? And that distinction, IOP says, is important, like the distinction between those who own the means of production and those who don't own it is important. Because, similarly, but in a different manner, the division between those who monopolize empowering work and those who are left with rote and repetitive and disempowering work also produces a hierarchy, a class difference, in which the former group dominates the latter group, in which the former group accrues to itself much greater wealth and power. Now this is a big deal because this is a attitude or belief that I think distinguishes IOPS in many ways from other organizations. And it's, you have to think about it a lot before you decide, or you should, before you decide, well, I agree with this or I don't agree with this. But it has lots of implications. So, for instance, not only does it mean that we have to change around workplace, that a good workplace is not only one that doesn't have an owner or a set of owners in a good future society, but it's one in which each person is doing a mix of tasks such that their mix, your mix, your mix, and your mix is not the same, you do different things, but each person's mix is comparably empowering. Right? So that when we come to our workers' assembly in our workplace to engage in self-managed decisions, everybody is prepared to participate. Here's what I mean by that. I'm trying to get in some vision along with, right? Here's what I mean by that. I was in a room in Argentina, maybe about this size, but only about 50 people. And we were in a circle, and I was supposed to talk, give it a talk. But before I was going to give the talk, I said, let's go around the room and say something about our situation. Now, these 50 people weren't just random. Each one of them was there from an occupied factory in Argentina. And this is some years back. Some of you will remember. There was turmoil in Argentina, and factories were occupied. About 400 factories went from capitalist ownership to occupied by and run by their workforce. But it even is more than that. What happened was these factories were basically failing. And the owner, the capitalist who owned the factory, decided, I've had enough. I want to sell my assets off and get out of here. And the workforce said, hold on. If you do that, we're going to lose our jobs. So the workforce takes the workplace. It says, we're not going to let you sell it. But the capitalist leaves anyhow. And when the capitalist leaves, so do the managers, so do the engineers, so do the accountants, so do the group that I want to say I was talking about a minute ago, the people who had a monopoly on empowering work, they all go too. So the capitalists and about 20% of the workforce disappear. And what's left is the working class part of the workplace. And so I'm sitting in a room with a representative from each of 50 of these. And the people are all working class background and working class experience. So the first person talks, the second person talks, just describing something about their situation. And at the beginning, as we're milling around before the meeting, everybody's very upbeat and excited. Because after all, they're meeting people from around Argentina who they don't know, who are doing something similar to what they're doing, trying to control their own lives, trying to make a new economy. So it's exciting, and they're talking. But as they start going around the room, one and then another and then another, it starts to get very mellow. And then it gets a little maudlin. And by the time you get up to the fifth or the sixth person, there's a lot of people in the room who were crying, literally. And the seventh this is actual not hypothetical, I'm sitting there experiencing this. And then the seventh person goes. And the seventh person says, I never thought I would say anything like this. I can't believe I'm going to say this. With tears. I can't believe I'm going to say this. But maybe Margaret Thatcher was right. We took over our workplace. We equalized our wages. And then we even made some changes because some people worked longer and they deserved a little more. Or they worked under worse conditions and they deserved a little. So it's even better than equalizing. And it is. They were right. So they made some changes. And we instituted democracy. And then, in fact, they did a little more than that. They had a workers' council, but they don't only have that. If this set of people is a work team, they realized that the work team should be responsible for its own situation.